Max was once a hero, a decorated canine officer who saved lives without hesitation. But after a tragedy shattered his owner's heart, Max became the target of unimaginable cruelty. 3 years later, abandoned in a 110-degree industrial wasteland with a 22-pound tumor dragging through the dirt, what Officer Linda Grant discovered that scorching July afternoon would change everything. The German Shepherd lay dying beneath collapsed metal roofing, his once magnificent black and tan coat now patchy and diseased. Flies swarmed around open sores where the massive growth had rubbed skin raw. The smell of infection hung heavy in the scorching air, but it was the small bronze medal hanging from his worn collar that made Linda's breath catch. Canine Unit Number 347, Phoenix Police Department. This wasn't just any dog left to die. This was a decorated service animal, a hero who had saved 12 human lives. The question wasn't why a hero was abandoned. The question was, why by the man who promised to never let him go? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Max had been more than just a decorated canine officer. For 5 relentless years, he'd served Phoenix Police Department with a devotion that went beyond mere training. His powerful frame and sharp intelligence had made him one of the most reliable working dogs in the entire Southwest region. 12 lives saved, 12 families who still sent Christmas cards to the precinct with pictures of children who wouldn't exist without Max's intervention. The warehouse fire of 2021 had been his most dangerous call. Officer Jake Morrison, trapped beneath flaming debris while gunfire echoed through smoke-filled corridors, would have died if Max hadn't dragged his 200-pound body across broken glass and through flames. The German Shepherd received a medal for that rescue, a small bronze disc that gleamed on his collar. 3 years later, that same medal would be the only clean thing about him. When a bullet grazed Max's leg during a drug raid later that year, the department made the difficult decision to retire him early. He'd given enough. At 7 years old, Max deserved a peaceful home, someone who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. Travis Henley seemed like the perfect choice. A Marine Corps veteran, honorably discharged after 2 tours in Afghanistan, Travis had specifically requested a retired K9. He had a 16-year-old son, Ethan, and they lived in a modest house with a large backyard in the suburbs of Phoenix. The adoption paperwork went through without hesitation. Jake Morrison himself had recommended Travis, spoke glowingly of the man's character during their brief interactions at a veterans support group. For those first few months, Max found something he'd never really had before: family. Ethan Henley wasn't just kind to Max, the teenage boy adored him. They were inseparable from the first day. Ethan would throw tennis balls until his arm ached while Max bounded after them with the enthusiasm of a puppy. They'd take long walks through the neighborhood in the cooler evening hours, Ethan talking about school and friends and dreams, while Max listened with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand every word. Travis would watch from the porch, beer in hand, and for those brief months, he'd smile at the sight of his son so happy. Max slept at the foot of Ethan's bed every single night, a guardian who'd traded the streets of Phoenix for one precious life to protect. But Ethan had recognized something in Max that others missed. The dog wasn't just loyal, he was perceptive, almost unsettlingly so. Max could sense changes in mood, detect danger before it materialized, read the subtle shifts in human behavior that preceded crisis. It was this gift that had made him such an exceptional K9 officer. And it was this same gift that would make him witness to unspeakable tragedy. The notebook Ethan kept hidden in his desk drawer contained entries that revealed a boy who understood that his father was struggling, that the nightmares and drinking were symptoms of wounds that went deeper than flesh. Ethan wrote about Max with a wisdom beyond his years, recognizing that this dog might be the only thing standing between his father and complete darkness. July 15th arrived in Phoenix with the kind of heat that turns asphalt soft and makes the air shimmer like water. By 10 in the morning, the temperature had already climbed past 100 degrees, and by noon it would reach a punishing 110. In an abandoned industrial lot on the eastern edge of the city, where rusted machinery sat like forgotten monuments and weeds pushed through cracked concrete, something that was once magnificent lay dying in the dirt. Officer Linda Grant had been with animal control for nearly 20 years, and she thought she'd seen everything. She'd pulled dogs from fighting rings, cats from hoarding situations, and once rescued a family of raccoons from a storm drain. But nothing had prepared her for the call that came through her radio that morning. A construction worker scouting locations for a demolition project had reported seeing what he described as a large dog that appeared to be dead or dying near the old Westmore manufacturing plant. Linda had responded expecting to find exactly that, a deceased animal that needed removal. What she found instead would haunt her for the rest of her life. The German Shepherd lay in a patch of shade created by a collapsed section of corrugated metal roofing. At first glance, Linda thought it was already dead. The dog was nothing but skin stretched over prominent bones, ribs clearly visible through mangy, patchy fur. But it was the massive growth protruding from the animal's abdomen that made Linda's breath catch in her throat. The tumor was enormous, easily the size of a basketball, dragging in the dirt and clearly causing immense pain. Flies buzzed around open sores where the growth had rubbed the skin raw. The smell of infection hung heavy in the scorching air. Linda approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd brought her catch pole, standard procedure for unknown dogs, but something told her she wouldn't need it. As she got closer, she noticed the collar, leather, worn, but still intact, and hanging from that collar was a small bronze medal that caught the sunlight. Linda knelt down, close enough now to see the shallow rise and fall of the dog's chest. He was alive, but barely. She reached out carefully, expecting aggression or at least fear. Instead, the dog's eyes opened, clouded with pain but still aware, and his tail moved. Not a full wag, just one weak thump against the ground. The gesture broke something inside Linda. This dog, dying and abandoned, was still trying to be good. Her hands trembled as she examined the medal. K9 Unit 347. Phoenix Police Department. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just any dog. This was a decorated service animal, a hero who had saved lives. Linda's radio crackled to life at her hip, but she couldn't make herself reach for it immediately. She sat there in the dirt, in the oppressive heat, with this broken warrior, and tried to understand what kind of person could do this. Not just abandon a dog, but abandon this dog. The one who'd served, who'd bled for his city, who wore his valor on his collar. When she finally managed to call for backup and veterinary assistance, her voice shook. While she waited, Linda did the only thing she could think to do. She opened her water bottle and carefully, drop by drop, wet the dog's mouth. His tongue moved weakly, trying to lap up the moisture. His eyes never left her face, and in them Linda saw something that would later keep her awake at night. Gratitude. This animal, subjected to what must have been months or even years of suffering, was grateful for simple kindness. The thought that he hadn't experienced kindness in so long that a few drops of water felt like a miracle made Linda's chest tighten until she could barely breathe. It took 3 calls before Linda found someone who would respond immediately. The first 2 veterinary clinics she contacted said they were booked, that they'd need to schedule an appointment, that emergency surgery for a stray would cost thousands. The 3rd call went to Second Chance Animal Rescue, a small operation run by a woman named Sarah Mitchell. Linda didn't know Sarah personally, had only heard her name mentioned at interdepartmental meetings about animal welfare. But the moment Linda described what she'd found, Sarah's response was immediate and certain. "I'm on my way. Keep him comfortable. I'm coming." 20 minutes later, a dusty pickup truck pulled into the industrial lot. Linda watched as a woman in her late 30s jumped out, not bothering to close the door behind her. Sarah Mitchell moved with purpose, carrying a veterinary kit that looked well used and a blanket that had seen better days. But it was the expression on her face when she saw Max that told Linda everything she needed to know about who this woman was. Sarah didn't flinch at the tumor, didn't hesitate at the smell or the flies. She dropped to her knees in the dirt beside the dying dog, and her hands went immediately to work, checking vital signs, examining the growth, assessing the damage. "His pulse is weak," Sarah said, her voice clinical but strained. "Body temperature is too high, but that might be the heat. Severe malnutrition, obvious infection from the tumor. God, how long has he been out here?" Linda shook her head. She didn't know. Hours? Days? Longer? Sarah's jaw tightened as she worked. "We need to move him now. I don't have the equipment here for what he needs. Help me get him into the truck." Together, they lifted the dog as carefully as possible. Even emaciated, he was heavy, and the tumor made positioning him difficult. Max whimpered, the first sound Linda had heard him make, as they placed him on the blanket in the truck bed. Sarah had positioned it in the shade of the cab, but the heat was relentless. "I'll follow you," Linda said, but Sarah was already climbing into the driver's seat. "I'm going straight to my facility. Dr. Cooper meets me there in emergencies. Call ahead and tell him it's bad. Tell him it's the worst he's seen." Linda nodded and reached for her radio, but Sarah hadn't finished. "And Linda, find out who did this. Find out who left a hero to die like garbage." The drive to Second Chance Animal Rescue took 15 minutes, and every second felt like an eternity. Sarah's facility was modest, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city with kennels, a small surgical suite, and an office that doubled as her living space. She'd started it 5 years ago with money from her late husband's life insurance, determined to create a place where animals that others gave up on could find hope. Now, as she carried Max inside, she wondered if hope would be enough. Dr. James Cooper was already there when Sarah arrived, having broken every speed limit to get from his clinic across town. He was a veteran surgeon, 52 years old, with gray streaking through his dark hair, and hands that had saved more animals than most people would see in a lifetime. But when he saw Max, even Cooper's professional composure faltered. "Jesus, Sarah," he breathed, already pulling on gloves. "That tumor, how is he even alive?" Sarah laid Max on the examination table as gently as she could. The dog's eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow and rapid. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but he is, and we're going to keep him that way." Cooper's examination was thorough and devastating. The tumor was massive, likely 10 kilograms or more. There were signs of old injuries, broken ribs that had healed poorly, scar tissue consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. The dog was severely anemic, dehydrated, and fighting multiple infections. Blood work would take time they didn't have, but Cooper could make educated guesses. "This dog has been suffering for a long time," he said quietly, and Sarah heard the anger beneath his clinical tone. This didn't happen overnight. Someone watched this happen. Someone let this happen. But it was Cooper's next discovery that transformed the situation from tragic to sinister. As he carefully examined the tumor's surface, preparing to take a biopsy, his fingers detected something unusual, a hard irregularity that didn't match the organic growth pattern. He reached for an ultrasound probe, and Sarah watched the screen as he moved it over the mass. There, embedded deep within the tissue, was a small foreign object, metallic, angular, deliberately placed. "Sarah," Cooper's voice was carefully controlled the way it got when he was trying not to explode. "This tumor grew around something. Someone injected something into this dog. This wasn't disease. This was done to him." The room went silent except for Max's labored breathing. Sarah felt her hands begin to shake, rage and horror warring inside her chest. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't even ordinary cruelty. This was calculated, prolonged torture. Someone had deliberately poisoned this dog, watched the tumor grow, watched him suffer for months or even years, and then abandoned him to die alone in the heat. "Who?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Who would do this?" Cooper shook his head, but his expression was grim. Someone who wanted him to suffer. Someone who wanted it to be slow. Linda Grant arrived as they were discussing next steps. She brought with her news that only deepened the mystery and multiplied the horror. "I traced the microchip," she said, pulling out her notepad. "The dog's name is Max, K9, Unit 347, Phoenix Police Department, retired 3 years ago due to injury. He was adopted by a man named Travis Henley, Marine Corps veteran, lives in North Phoenix, has a son." She paused, consulting her notes. "Had a son, Ethan Henley, died in a car accident 3 years ago, right around the time Max was adopted." Sarah and Cooper exchanged glances. A veteran who'd lost his son, a decorated canine adopted into a grieving household. And somehow it had ended here, with deliberate torture and abandonment. "I'm going to his house," Linda said, already heading for the door. "I've got a warrant approved for animal welfare check. If there's evidence there—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. After Linda left, Sarah stood beside the examination table where Max lay unconscious, sedated now to spare him pain while they planned their next move. She placed her hand gently on his head, feeling the heat of fever beneath her palm, the prominent bones of his skull. This dog had saved 12 lives, had pulled a police officer from fire, had served his city with courage and loyalty, and this was his reward. But Sarah Mitchell had learned something in her years of running the rescue, something she'd learned the hard way when she couldn't save her own husband. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't letting go. Sometimes it's fighting even when the odds are impossible. She looked up at Dr. Cooper. "What are his chances?" Cooper didn't sugarcoat it. "Surgery to remove that tumor? Maybe 30% survival rate, and that's if we can stabilize him first. The infection alone could kill him. The anemia means he might not survive anesthesia. And we have no idea what that foreign object is or what kind of poison was used. Sarah, even if we do everything right, he'll probably die on that table." Sarah nodded slowly. She'd expected that answer. She looked down at Max, at this broken warrior who'd spent his last strength trying to wag his tail for a stranger. "Then we'd better make sure we do everything right," she said, "because that 30%, that's not nothing, and this dog deserves someone fighting for that chance." Cooper smiled slightly, a sad, proud smile. "I'll clear my schedule. But Sarah, this surgery alone will cost—" She cut him off. "I know what it costs. I'll figure it out." As she said it, Sarah thought of the $8,000 sitting in a college fund for Emma. Money she'd been saving for years, penny by painful penny. Money that was supposed to give her daughter opportunities Sarah never had. Money that suddenly felt like exactly the right thing to spend saving a life that had spent itself saving others. The first turning point came not with a dramatic revelation, but with the quiet horror of medical evidence. Dr. Cooper had insisted on a full diagnostic workup before any surgical intervention could be considered. X-rays, blood panels, ultrasounds. Each test revealed another layer of suffering that Max had endured, each result more damning than the last. Sarah stood in the small imaging room of the rescue center, staring at the X-ray illuminated on the light box, and felt her stomach turn. The images told a story more terrible than she'd imagined. Max's chest cavity showed the cloudy patches of pneumonia in his left lung, the infection likely caused by weeks or months of lying on cold ground in his weakened state. His ribs bore the telltale signs of multiple fractures, some old and healed at odd angles, others more recent. Cooper pointed to them with his pen, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "These breaks, they're consistent with blunt force trauma." "Not from an accident, Sarah. From being hit repeatedly, over a long period of time." He moved the pen to another area. "And this one here, this fresh break, may be 2 weeks old. Someone was still beating him even after he got this sick." But it was the ultrasound of the tumor that revealed the most sinister detail. Cooper had brought in a specialist colleague, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, who'd worked extensively with toxicology cases. She studied the images for a long time before speaking, and when she did, her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. That foreign object embedded in the tumor, it's consistent with a hypodermic needle fragment. It broke off during injection, probably because the dog moved. The tissue growth pattern around it suggests the introduction of a carcinogenic compound, something that would stimulate rapid, abnormal cell growth. She looked up at Sarah with eyes that had seen too much cruelty in her career. This wasn't an accidental poisoning. Someone injected this dog with a cancer-causing agent, someone with medical knowledge or at least access to controlled substances, and they did it deliberately, knowing exactly what would happen. Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "How long?" Her voice came out hoarse. "How long has he been carrying this?" Dr. Rodriguez consulted the images again, measuring the tumor's size and density. Based on the growth rate of this type of carcinogenic mass, and factoring in his malnourished state, which would have slowed the progression, I'd estimate 18 to 24 months, nearly 2 years of growing pain, increasing debilitation, constant suffering. She paused, then added quietly, "What's remarkable isn't that he survived this long. What's remarkable is that he had the will to survive at all." The blood work results arrived an hour later, and they painted an even grimmer picture. Max was severely anemic, his red blood cell count dangerously low. His white blood cell count was elevated, indicating his body's desperate attempt to fight multiple infections. Kidney function was compromised, liver enzymes were elevated, and his protein levels indicated severe, prolonged malnutrition. "He's been starving," Cooper said flatly, looking at the numbers. Even if someone was feeding him, his body couldn't process nutrition properly with this tumor consuming resources. But looking at his condition, I don't think anyone was feeding him. Not adequately. Not for a very long time. Sarah made a decision then that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and opened the GoFundMe app. Her hands shook slightly as she began typing, but her resolve was absolute. The campaign title was simple: Save K9 Hero Max. She uploaded the photo Linda had taken of Max in the industrial lot, his medal visible on his collar, the tumor obvious even in the harsh sunlight. And then she wrote the description, not holding back any detail of what had been done to him. She explained about the deliberate poisoning, the evidence of abuse, the months of suffering. She told Max's story, how he'd saved 12 lives, how he'd pulled a police officer from a burning building, how he'd served his city with courage and loyalty. And she told them what he needed now: extensive surgery, extended hospitalization, rehabilitation. She set the goal at $35,000, knowing it was ambitious, knowing it might not be enough, knowing she was asking strangers to care about one dog when millions suffered. But she hit publish anyway. While Sarah worked on the fundraising campaign, Linda Grant was conducting her own investigation. The warrant for Travis Henley's property had been approved based on the evidence of animal cruelty, and Linda had brought backup, 2 other animal control officers and a sheriff's deputy for safety. What they found at the modest house in North Phoenix would turn the case from criminal neglect into something far darker. The backyard was overgrown, the grass burned brown by the relentless Arizona sun. But it was the pattern of disturbed earth that caught Linda's attention. 5 distinct areas where the soil looked different, where the weeds grew in slightly different patterns. She'd seen enough backyard pet graves to recognize them immediately. The excavation took 3 hours in the scorching heat. One by one, the remains were uncovered. 5 German shepherds, all adults, all showing signs of similar tumors, even in their decomposed state. The veterinary examiner who processed the scene was a woman named Dr. Helen Moss, and her preliminary assessment was damning. These animals all died from similar causes, massive tumorous growths, likely the same carcinogenic agent used on the dog you found alive. Based on decomposition rates in this climate, I'd estimate they died at intervals over the past 3 years, 6 months between deaths, give or take. Someone was doing this systematically. Linda's deputy had been searching the house with another warrant, and what he found provided another piece of the horrifying puzzle. In the garage, hidden behind boxes of old military gear and Ethan's childhood belongings, they discovered a locked metal cabinet. Inside were veterinary supplies, syringes, needles, and 3 vials of a substance that would later be identified as a veterinary chemotherapy drug that, when administered incorrectly and in specific doses, could actually stimulate rather than inhibit tumor growth. There were also records, meticulous notes in Travis Henley's handwriting documenting each injection, each dog, each progression of disease. The dates lined up perfectly with the graves in the backyard. But it was the final entry in the log that made Linda's blood run cold. It read simply, Max, K9, number 347, initial injection 14 months ago. Subject shows remarkable resistance, tumor growth slower than others, increased dosage required, final injection 6 weeks ago. Disposal pending. The clinical detachment of the language, the reference to a living being as a subject, the word disposal applied to a creature who had once been a hero, it all pointed to something beyond grief-induced cruelty. This was calculated. This was methodical. This was someone who had turned torture into a science. Linda immediately called Sarah with the findings. Sarah was at the rescue center with Emma, who had just returned from school and was now sitting quietly beside Max's recovery kennel, reading to him from a book about dogs. When Sarah's phone rang and she heard Linda's voice, tight with suppressed rage, she stepped away so Emma wouldn't hear. But as Linda described the 5 graves, the injection logs, the systematic nature of the torture, Sarah felt her legs weaken. She had to lean against the wall to keep standing. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would someone do this? What possible reason? Linda's response was grim. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I've issued an arrest warrant for Travis Henley. Animal cruelty, 5 counts, possibly 6 if Max doesn't make it. And Sarah? There's more. I found newspaper clippings in his office about canine retirements, about police dogs being adopted. He was specifically seeking out retired canines. Max wasn't random. None of them were. The news broke that evening on every local channel. Decorated canine officer found tortured, 5 other police dogs discovered dead. The story spread like wildfire through Phoenix, then across Arizona, then nationally. By midnight, Sarah's GoFundMe had raised $40,000. By morning, it had reached 80,000. The comment section was flooded with messages of support, outrage, and disbelief. Former police officers who had worked with K-9 units donated and shared their own stories of K-9 partners who had saved their lives. Veterans groups weighed in, some expressing shock that one of their own could commit such acts. Animal rights organizations demanded maximum prosecution. The story had touched a nerve in the collective consciousness, the betrayal of a creature who had served, the torture of the loyal, the abandonment of a hero. But not everyone responded with unified condemnation. By the second day, the story had taken an unexpected turn. Veteran advocacy groups began to research Travis Henley's background. They discovered his service record: 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge, diagnosed with PTSD. They found records of his son's death. Ethan Henley, killed in a single car accident 3 years prior. Driver identified as Travis himself, though no charges had been filed. Suddenly, a counter-narrative emerged. Travis Henley wasn't a monster, some argued. He was a broken man, a casualty of war and grief, someone who needed treatment, not condemnation. The online debate became heated, divisive. Mental health advocates argued that PTSD could manifest in unpredictable ways, that trauma could break even good people. Animal welfare activists countered that suffering didn't excuse inflicting suffering, that Travis had made conscious choices every single day for years. The controversy reached a fever pitch when a prominent veterans organization issued a statement defending Travis, calling for understanding and rehabilitation rather than punishment. "We cannot abandon our soldiers when they're broken," the statement read. Travis Henley served his country with honor. He lost his son in a tragic accident. He deserves our compassion, not our condemnation. The response was immediate and furious. Other veterans, including those with PTSD, fired back with their own statements. Jake Morrison, the police officer Max had saved from the warehouse fire, published an open letter that went viral within hours. "I have PTSD," he wrote. "I wake up screaming from nightmares about friends burning alive. I struggle with loud noises, crowds, unexpected movements. But I have never, not once, hurt something that couldn't fight back. PTSD is real. Trauma is real. But cruelty is a choice. Travis Henley made that choice every single day for years. Don't insult those of us fighting our demons by suggesting our illness makes us monsters." Sarah found herself thrust into the center of the controversy when a local news station requested an interview. She initially declined, wanting to focus on Max's care, but Dr. Cooper convinced her otherwise. "People need to hear from you," he said. "They need to understand what this is really about." So Sarah agreed, and the interview aired during prime time. The reporter asked her directly, "Some people say Travis Henley deserves compassion, that his PTSD and grief over losing his son explain his actions. What do you say to that?" Sarah looked directly into the camera, her exhaustion visible, but her voice steady. "I'm a widow," she said. "My husband was Army. He had PTSD from his service. He struggled. We struggled. But he never hurt anyone. Trauma is real, but it doesn't erase agency. It doesn't erase choice. Travis Henley chose to adopt 6 dogs specifically because they were retired K-9 officers. He chose to inject them with poison. He chose to document their suffering. He chose to bury 5 of them and abandon the 6th to die alone. Those were choices, not symptoms. And Max? Max chose to keep wagging his tail despite everything done to him. That's the choice I'm honoring, not Travis's trauma, Max's resilience. The development of Max's story unfolded over the following week like a storm gathering strength, each day bringing new revelations that deepened the complexity of the case and intensified the public's emotional investment. Sarah had initially hoped to keep Emma somewhat sheltered from the darker details, but her 8-year-old daughter was far too perceptive to be protected from reality. Emma had been the one to discover the full extent of Ethan Henley's relationship with Max, and what she found would fundamentally change everyone's understanding of what had happened. It started innocently enough. Emma had been sitting beside Max's kennel at the rescue center, as she did every day after school, reading aloud to him from her favorite books. Max was stable now, sedated and receiving round-the-clock care as they prepared him for surgery, but Dr. Cooper encouraged the reading sessions. "Animals respond to calm voices," he'd told Emma. "You're helping him heal just by being here." On this particular afternoon, Emma had finished her book and was idly searching on her tablet for more stories about German Shepherds when she stumbled across a news article from 3 years prior. The headline read, "Local teen dies in single car accident, father survives." There was a photo of Ethan Henley, smiling and bright-eyed, his arm around a young German Shepherd. The caption identified the dog as Max, newly adopted K-9 officer, retired due to injury. Emma read the article carefully, her young mind piecing together details that adults had missed in their rush to judgment. The accident had occurred on July 23rd, 3 years ago. Ethan had been 16. The article mentioned that his father, Travis Henley, had been driving and survived with minor injuries. It noted that a K-9 dog was also in the vehicle and had survived. What the article didn't say, but what Emma's intuition told her, was that there was more to this story. She continued searching, diving deeper into archived local news, and eventually found something that made her heart race. A brief mention in a follow-up article stated that police had investigated whether alcohol was involved but had found insufficient evidence to press charges. The case had been closed, ruled as an accident caused by excessive speed on a wet road. But Emma kept digging, and what she found next changed everything. In the comments section of a memorial page for Ethan, someone who identified themselves as a classmate had written a post from 2 years ago. "I miss you every day, Ethan. I'm sorry I didn't say something when you told me you were scared. I'm sorry I didn't believe you when you said your dad's drinking was getting worse. I hope you and Max found peace together." Emma's hands trembled as she read those words. She called for her mother, her voice high and urgent. Sarah came running, fear clutching at her chest until she saw that Emma was physically fine, just shaken. "Mom," Emma said, turning the tablet to show Sarah the screen. "I think Max knows something. I think Max was there when Ethan died, and I think it wasn't really an accident." Sarah sat down heavily beside her daughter, reading and rereading the comment. The implications were staggering. If Travis had been drinking, if the accident hadn't been simply a tragedy but the result of impaired driving, if Max had witnessed it all, suddenly the torture took on a different dimension. This wasn't just cruelty born of grief. This might be guilt transformed into rage, a father punishing the witness to his greatest sin. Sarah immediately called Linda Grant, who arrived within the hour. Together they began pulling together evidence that the police had overlooked or deemed insufficient 3 years ago. Linda used her law enforcement connections to request the original accident report, the toxicology results, the witness statements. What they discovered was a masterclass in how the system could fail when people wanted to show compassion to a grieving father. The accident report noted that Travis had been driving his pickup truck with Ethan in the passenger seat and Max in the back. According to Travis's statement, they'd been heading home from Ethan's baseball practice when a sudden downpour reduced visibility. Travis claimed he'd lost control on a curve. The truck had skidded off the road and struck a utility pole on the passenger side. Ethan had died instantly from blunt force trauma. Travis had sustained a concussion and lacerations. Max had been thrown from the truck bed but had survived with only minor injuries. The investigating officer's notes included a telling detail that had been buried in the file. Driver appeared disoriented and emotional at scene assess. Paramedics noted smell of alcohol but attributed it to hand sanitizer in vehicle. Blood alcohol test requested but delayed due to driver's medical treatment. By the time sample was taken 4 hours post-accident, BAC was at 0.5, below legal limit, but suspicious, given time elapsed. Linda's face darkened as she read the report. "They gave him time to sober up," she said quietly. 4 hours. His BAC would have been much higher at the time of the crash, but he was a veteran, a grieving father in the emergency room. They showed mercy. She flipped through more pages. And look at this. There were 2 witness statements, both from passing motorists who stopped at the scene. One said they thought they saw the truck swerving before the curve, as if the driver was having trouble maintaining lane control. The other said they heard what sounded like shouting or arguing coming from the vehicle before the crash. But neither witness could be certain, and with Travis's story and the officer's sympathy, it was filed as a tragic accident. Sarah felt sick. Max was in that truck. He saw everything. And then Travis brought him home and... She couldn't finish the sentence. The horror of it was too immense. A dog who had witnessed his beloved Ethan's death, who had perhaps tried to warn Travis, who had survived only to be systematically tortured by the man responsible. Emma, who had been listening quietly, spoke up with the clarity that children sometimes possess. "That's why Travis got more dogs after Max," she said. "He was trying to replace Ethan. But when they couldn't be Ethan, when they reminded him of what happened, he hurt them too. And Max? Max was there that night. Max knew the truth. So Travis had to hurt him most of all." The psychological profile that emerged from these discoveries was deeply disturbing. Linda brought in Dr. Marcus Webb, a forensic psychologist who specialized in cases involving violence and trauma. After reviewing all the evidence, the accident reports, the injection logs, the systematic nature of the torture, Travis's service record and PTSD diagnosis, Dr. Webb provided an analysis that was both sympathetic and damning. "Travis Henley is suffering from complex trauma," Dr. Webb explained during a meeting with Sarah, Linda, and the prosecutor, who would be handling the case. His PTSD from military service, combined with the guilt of killing his son while driving drunk, has created a psychological break. But here's what's crucial to understand. Trauma explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Travis has been engaged in what I'd call displaced punishment. He can't punish himself adequately for what he's done, so he punishes surrogates, specifically canine dogs that represent service, loyalty, and heroism, qualities he feels he's betrayed. The doctor continued, his expression grave. The fact that he sought out retired canine officers specifically is significant. These weren't random dogs. They represented something to him, perhaps the honor he felt he'd lost, perhaps the loyalty he felt he didn't deserve. By torturing them, he was torturing the parts of himself he hated. And Max, who was actually present for Ethan's death, who witnessed Travis's greatest failure. Max became the primary target. The witness who couldn't testify but whose very existence was an accusation. Sarah listened, trying to hold on to both her compassion and her anger. So what does that mean for prosecution? Will they use his trauma as a defense? The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Reeves, shook her head firmly. They'll try. But premeditation, documentation, and the systematic nature of these acts work against an insanity or diminished capacity defense. This wasn't a moment of uncontrolled rage. This was planned, sustained, conscious cruelty over years. That's not mental illness acting. That's evil choosing to act. Meanwhile, the controversy in the media had reached a boiling point. The revelation that Travis might have killed his son while driving drunk and then tortured the witness, albeit a canine witness who couldn't speak, added explosive fuel to an already raging fire. Veteran advocacy groups that had initially defended Travis began to fracture. Some maintained their support, arguing that his actions were symptoms of untreated psychological wounds that the system had failed to address. Others withdrew their support entirely, stating that Travis had betrayed the values of service and honor that military life represented. Animal welfare organizations were calling for maximum sentencing. Victims' rights groups were demanding that Ethan's death be reinvestigated. And through it all, Max lay in his kennel, unaware that he had become the focal point of a national debate about trauma, accountability, justice, and mercy. It was during this tumultuous period that Jake Morrison made a decision that would impact everything. The police officer whom Max had saved from the warehouse fire had been living with crushing guilt since learning that he was the one who had recommended Travis as an adopter. Jake had thought he was giving Max a good home with a fellow veteran who would understand what a service animal needed. Instead, he delivered Max into years of torture. The guilt was eating Jake alive, manifesting in sleepless nights and panic attacks that rivaled anything he'd experienced from his PTSD. His wife had found him one night sitting in their garage with Max's medal, the one Jake had received as a duplicate when Max retired, clutched in his hands, tears streaming down his face. "I sent him to hell," Jake had whispered. "I sent my savior to hell." His wife, a practical woman named Catherine, who had stood by Jake through his worst moments, sat down beside him and said something that changed his perspective. "Then get him out of hell. You can't undo what happened, but you can do something now." So Jake had made a phone call to his bank, then to his investment advisor, then to Sarah Mitchell. When Sarah answered, exhausted from another 18-hour day at the rescue center, Jake's first words were, "I need to see Max. And I need to do something that won't make this right, because nothing can make this right but might help him survive." Sarah, wary but curious, agreed to meet him at the center the following morning. Jake arrived carrying a cashier's check for $50,000. Sarah stared at it, uncomprehending. Jake, this is nearly everything the surgery costs. Where did you—" Jake cut her off, his voice rough with emotion. "It's my savings. Money I'd put away for my kids' college, for retirement, for someday. But Max saved my life. I was dead in that warehouse, and he dragged me out. And then I sent him to a man who destroyed him. This money, it's blood money, Sarah. It's guilt money. But maybe it can become healing money. Maybe it can give Max the chance I stole from him." Sarah tried to refuse, tried to explain that the GoFundMe had already raised enough, but Jake wouldn't hear it. "Use it for his recovery," he insisted. "Use it for the other animals here. Use it to make sure no other canine ends up abandoned and broken. Just use it. Please, let me do this one thing right." Sarah accepted the check, and as she did, she made Jake a promise. "Come with me," she said, leading him to Max's kennel. The German Shepherd was awake, his pain managed by medication, his eyes clearer than they'd been since his rescue. Sarah opened the kennel door carefully. "Max," she said softly, "someone's here to see you. Someone who's been very worried about you." Jake knelt down slowly, his hands shaking. He didn't try to touch Max, didn't make any sudden movements. He just looked at the dog he'd saved, and who had saved him. The dog he'd inadvertently betrayed. "Hey, partner," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." What happened next would become one of the most viewed videos on the internet. Emma, who had been watching from nearby, had pulled out her phone and started recording, some instinct telling her this moment mattered. Max, who had been wary of men since his rescue, who flinched at raised voices and sudden movements, slowly lifted his head. He looked at Jake for a long moment, and something in those intelligent brown eyes seemed to recognize the man before him. Then, with visible effort, Max pulled himself forward in the kennel. It clearly hurt. His body was still ravaged by disease and malnutrition, but he persisted. And when he reached Jake, Max did something that made everyone watching catch their breath. He placed his paw on Jake's knee, just as he had once done during their canine training exercises, and he licked Jake's hand. Jake broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs. He carefully, so carefully, placed his hand on Max's head. "You remember me," he choked out. "After everything, you still remember me, and you don't hate me." Sarah, watching this moment of recognition and forgiveness, felt something shift in her understanding of what they were really fighting for. This wasn't just about saving one dog from physical death. This was about proving that even after the worst betrayals, even after the cruelest tortures, love and trust could still exist, that a creature could suffer immensely at human hands and still offer a paw in friendship, that forgiveness was possible even when it wasn't deserved. Emma stopped recording and quietly showed her mother the video. "Mom," she said, "people need to see this. They need to know that Max isn't broken. He's still good. Even after everything Travis did, Max is still good." Sarah hesitated. The video was raw, emotional, deeply personal. But Emma was right. In all the debates about Travis's culpability and Max's suffering, people had lost sight of Max himself, not as a symbol or a case study, but as a living being capable of resilience, forgiveness, and continued love. Sarah took the phone and, with Jake's permission, posted the video to the rescue center's social media accounts. Within 2 hours, it had been shared 10,000 times. By evening, it was on national news. By the next morning, it had been viewed 8 million times worldwide. The video's impact was profound and immediate. People who had been arguing about Travis's mental state, about punishment versus rehabilitation, about the value of animal life versus human suffering, they all stopped and watched this moment of pure, uncomplicated grace. Max, tortured for years, abandoned to die, still offered his paw to a human, still trusted, still loved. The comments section filled with messages that transcended the previous divisiveness. Veterans with PTSD wrote about how Max's resilience gave them hope. Survivors of abuse talked about how Max's capacity for forgiveness inspired their own healing journeys. Parents showed the video to their children as a lesson in mercy, and donations poured in, not just for Max's care, but for canine retirement programs, for animal rescue organizations, for veterans' mental health services. One act of canine forgiveness had reminded millions of people of something they'd forgotten in their rush to judge. That redemption starts with choosing kindness over bitterness, even when bitterness is justified. The day of Max's surgery arrived with the weight of collective hope pressing down on everyone involved. Dr. Cooper had assembled a team of specialists, each volunteering their time because Max's story had touched them personally. The surgical suite at Second Chance Animal Rescue had been transformed into a state-of-the-art operating theater, with equipment borrowed or donated from veterinary hospitals across Phoenix. Outside, a crowd had gathered despite Sarah's requests for privacy, not protesters or media, but ordinary people who felt compelled to bear witness. They stood in the July heat holding signs that read, "Fight Max" and "Heroes Never Die," and simply, "We love you." Some had driven hundreds of miles. One elderly veteran had flown in from Oregon, standing silently with tears streaming down his weathered face, holding a photo of his own canine partner from Vietnam. Inside, Sarah stood in the observation area with Emma, both of them gowned and masked, watching through the glass as Dr. Cooper made his final preparations. Emma's small hand gripped her mother's tightly, her knuckles white with tension. "He's going to be okay, right, Mom?" she whispered for the dozenth time. Sarah couldn't lie to her daughter, not about this. "I don't know, baby. But Dr. Cooper is the best, and Max is strong, and that's all we can ask for." Jake Morrison stood beside them, having refused to leave despite Sarah's gentle suggestions that he might want to wait elsewhere. "I need to be here," he'd said simply. "If Max doesn't make it, I need to be here. I owe him that." The surgery began at 6 in the morning. Time to give them the full day if complications arose. Dr. Cooper's first incision revealed the true horror of what Max had endured. The tumor was even more extensive than the imaging had suggested. Tentacles of diseased tissue wrapping around vital organs, blood vessels distorted and engorged around the massive growth. Cooper's voice came through the intercom, steady despite the challenge before him. "The tumor has partially attached to the intestinal wall and is pressing against the liver. This is going to take longer than anticipated. His blood pressure is stable for now, but we need to move carefully." The assisting surgeon, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, began the delicate work of separating healthy tissue from diseased, her movements precise and unhurried. 2 hours into the surgery, the first crisis hit. Max's blood pressure dropped suddenly, alarms beeping urgently in the sterile room. Emma gasped, pressing against the glass. Sarah pulled her close, her own heart hammering. Through the intercom, they heard Dr. Cooper's calm commands. "He's hemorrhaging. Rodriguez, clamp that vessel. We need 2 units of blood now. Come on, Max. Stay with us." The minutes stretched into eternality as the surgical team worked frantically to stop the bleeding and stabilize their patient. Sarah found herself praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore, making impossible bargains. "Let him live, and I'll dedicate my life to saving every animal I can reach. Let him live, and I'll forgive Travis. Let him live, and I'll believe in miracles again." At 8:47 in the morning, Max's heart stopped. The monitor's steady beep became a single, piercing tone that shot through Sarah like a physical blow. Emma screamed, "No! No! No! No!" as Dr. Cooper immediately began chest compressions. Through the glass, they watched the team move and practice synchronization. Compressions, medications, the defibrillator charged and applied, once, twice, 3 times. The flat line on the monitor seemed to mock every hope, every prayer, every desperate wish. Sarah felt Jake's hand on her shoulder, steadying her as her legs threatened to give way. "He's a fighter," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't survive Travis to die here. Come on, Max. Come on, partner." 3 minutes and 47 seconds after his heart stopped, an eternity compressed into brutal clarity, the monitor jumped, a beat, another, then a rhythm, weak but present. Max was back. Dr. Cooper's voice crackled through the intercom, exhausted but relieved. "We have sinus rhythm. Blood pressure is coming up. Let's get this tumor out before he decides to do that again." The surgery continued, but the close call had shaken everyone. In the observation room, Emma was sobbing against Sarah's chest. "I can't watch him almost die again, Mom. I can't." But she didn't look away from the glass, couldn't tear her eyes from the small form on the table who was fighting so hard to live. 4 hours into the surgery, Dr. Cooper finally began the extraction of the tumor itself. It was a grotesque mass, swollen and discolored, nearly 10 kilograms of diseased tissue that had been slowly killing Max for almost 2 years. As Cooper carefully cut it away from its attachments, he narrated for the team and for those watching. "I'm seeing significant adhesion to the peritoneum. The carcinogenic agent caused aggressive local invasion, and here—" He paused, using forceps to extract something from within the mass. "Here's our smoking gun. The needle fragment." He held it up to the light, and even through the glass, Sarah could see the small piece of metal that represented Travis Henley's calculated cruelty. That tiny fragment had caused all of this suffering, and seeing it removed felt like extracting a piece of evil from the world. But the moment of relief was short-lived. As Dr. Cooper continued the extraction, Dr. Rodriguez's voice took on an urgent tone. "James, his pressure is dropping again. Heart rate declining." The monitors showed Max's vital signs deteriorating rapidly. "The anemia," Cooper said, already adjusting his approach. "His body can't handle this much trauma. Rodriguez, we need to speed this up. If we can get the tumor out in the next 10 minutes, he might have a chance, but if we're careful and slow, he'll crash before we're done." It was an impossible choice: rush and potentially damage vital organs, or proceed methodically and watch Max slip away from blood loss and shock. Dr. Cooper made his decision. "We go fast. Everyone, maximum focus. Sarah, if you're listening, this is where we need Max to be as strong as his reputation." The next 10 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She watched the surgical team move with controlled urgency, Cooper's hands working with the speed of decades of experience, Rodriguez anticipating every move, the anesthesiologist carefully balancing medications to keep Max under while supporting his failing cardiovascular system. Emma had buried her face in Sarah's stomach, unable to watch. Jake had his eyes closed, lips moving in what might have been prayer. And through it all, the monitors beeped their irregular rhythm, Max's body struggling to survive even as the source of his suffering was being removed. At 12 minutes past 11 in the morning, Dr. Cooper's voice came through the intercom with words Sarah had almost given up hoping to hear. "Tumor is out. Complete extraction. Now we close him up and pray everything holds." The mass was deposited in a surgical basin, and even knowing what it was, Sarah felt compelled to look at it. This had been inside Max, growing and consuming him from within, a physical manifestation of Travis's hatred and guilt. And now it was gone, a lump of dead tissue that no longer had power over the dog who had carried it for so long. But the surgery wasn't over. Closing the extensive wound would take time, and Max's condition remained critical. His blood pressure was dangerously low despite transfusions. His body temperature had dropped. Every indicator suggested that even with the tumor removed, Max might not survive. Dr. Rodriguez performed the closure with meticulous care, each suture placed perfectly to give Max the best chance at healing. Cooper monitored the vital signs, administering medications to support Max's struggling system. And slowly, incrementally, things began to stabilize. Blood pressure crept upward, heart rate found a steadier rhythm, body temperature, supported by warming blankets, began to rise toward normal. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Dr. Cooper stepped back from the table. "We're done." He made it through. The words seemed impossible, too good to be true. "The next 72 hours are critical. Infection is a major risk given the extent of the surgery and his compromised immune system. His anemia means healing will be slower, and we still don't know if there's been any organ damage from the tumor's presence or from the crashes during surgery. But he's alive. And that's more than I honestly expected." Cooper's voice was heavy with exhaustion, but Sarah could hear the note of cautious hope. Max was moved to the intensive care unit, a small room that had been outfitted with monitoring equipment and climate control. He lay on soft bedding, his shaved abdomen covered with extensive surgical dressings, tubes and lines connecting him to various machines. He was unconscious, would remain so for hours as the anesthesia wore off. Emma was finally allowed to enter, and she approached the kennel with reverence, as if Max were something sacred. "You did it," she whispered, placing her hand gently on the only part of Max she could reach, his paw. "You kept fighting. Thank you for not giving up." Sarah stepped outside to address the crowd that had been waiting for 8 hours in the brutal heat. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but these people deserved to know. As she emerged from the building, a cheer went up, spontaneous and hopeful. Sarah raised her hands for quiet. "Max survived the surgery," she said. and the cheer that erupted was deafening. She waited for it to die down before continuing. But he's not out of danger. The next few days will tell us if his body can heal from everything it's been through. Dr. Cooper says Max's survival so far is remarkable, but the road ahead is still uncertain. What I can tell you is that Max fought today. He died on that table and came back. He refused to give up, and we won't give up on him either. A reporter who had been waiting with the crowd called out, "Sarah, some people are saying this surgery was a waste of resources, that the money and medical expertise could have been used for people instead of a dog. What do you say to that?" Sarah felt anger flare, but she took a breath, remembering that Max's story was about more than defending one decision. I say that compassion isn't a finite resource. Caring about Max doesn't mean we care less about people. If anything, Max has shown us what it means to keep loving even when love brings pain. He's shown us forgiveness, resilience, the will to survive against impossible odds. Those aren't just animal traits. Those are the best of human traits reflected back at us. If we can't find it in ourselves to save one dog who saved 12 human lives, who served his community with courage, who suffered torture and abandonment and still wags his tail at kindness, then what does that say about us? Another voice from the crowd, an elderly woman leaning on a cane, called out, "My grandson is alive because of a K9 unit. They deserve everything we can give them." A chorus of agreement rose up, and Sarah felt the weight of communal purpose, of shared conviction that Max's life mattered, that this fight was worth it. She thanked them for coming, for caring, for holding vigil. As the crowd began to disperse, many leaving flowers and cards and toys for Max's recovery, Sarah turned back to the rescue center. Inside, her daughter sat beside a sleeping dog, and together they began the next phase of their battle, waiting to see if survival would lead to recovery, if the body that had endured so much could finally, truly heal. Jake Morrison remained as well, taking up a chair in the corner of the ICU room. When Sarah told him he should go home, rest, be with his family, he shook his head. "My wife understands. I need to be here for the next few days. I need to see Max wake up. I need to know that my mistake didn't end his life." Sarah didn't argue. She understood the weight of guilt, the need for redemption, the hunger to witness the miracle you've desperately hoped for. So they settled in together, Sarah, Emma, and Jake. 3 people bound to one dog by threads of love, guilt, hope, and determination. They would wait as long as it took. They would be there when Max opened his eyes, and they would face whatever came next together. The tragedy came not with Max's death, but with something far more complex and devastating, the moment when survival itself became a question of quality versus quantity, when those who loved Max most had to confront the unbearable possibility that they had saved his body only to trap him in a prison of suffering. It began 24 hours after the surgery, when Max should have been showing signs of waking from anesthesia. Dr. Cooper had reduced the sedation medications, expecting Max to gradually regain consciousness, but the monitors told a different story. Max's brain activity remained at minimal levels, his responses to stimuli non-existent. At 36 hours post-surgery, Cooper called Sarah into his office, his face bearing the expression of a man about to deliver news he wished he never had to speak. "The warfarin poisoning that Rebecca administered," Cooper began, his voice heavy with clinical detachment that barely masked his anguish. "We knew it caused internal bleeding, but we didn't realize the extent until now. Sarah, Max has suffered brain damage. The lack of oxygen during the bleeding episodes, combined with the cardiac arrest during surgery, has resulted in significant neurological injury." Sarah felt the words hit her like physical blows. She sat down slowly, her legs refusing to support her anymore. "What does that mean? Specifically, what does that mean for Max?" Cooper pulled up scans on his computer, Images of Max's brain that meant little to Sarah but clearly spoke volumes to the veterinarian. It means that even if he wakes up, he may not be the same dog. He could be blind, deaf, unable to walk. His personality might be completely altered. The Max who was loyal, gentle, heroic, that Max might be gone, replaced by a dog who is confused, possibly aggressive, certainly suffering. Emma had followed her mother into the office despite Sarah's attempts to keep her in the waiting room, and now the 8-year-old stood frozen in the doorway, processing words that no child should have to hear. "You mean we hurt him?" Her voice was small, breaking. "We saved him from Travis, but we hurt him anyway?" The guilt in her question reflected the guilt that was already consuming Sarah. They had fought so hard to save Max's life, had poured resources and love and desperate hope into keeping him alive. But had they considered what he would want? Had they thought about whether survival without quality of life was really salvation at all? Dr. Cooper's next words made the situation even more impossible. "We have to make a decision. We can continue life support, wait to see if he wakes up, assess the damage then." "But Sarah, if he wakes up severely brain damaged, unable to recognize anyone, possibly in pain or distress, he can't communicate, is that fair to him? Or do we make the compassionate choice now while he's unconscious and not suffering to let him go peacefully?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sarah had faced this choice before with her husband David, watching him deteriorate day by day, knowing that the machines were keeping alive a body that housed a mind slowly disappearing. David had made his wishes clear before the end. No extraordinary measures, no existence as a shell, but Max couldn't tell them what he wanted. Max couldn't sign a living will or express his desires. They were left to guess, to project their own fears and hopes onto a creature who had no voice in his own fate. Jake Morrison, who had been present for this devastating conversation, spoke up for the first time. "When I was in the coma after the warehouse fire, the doctors told my wife the same thing. They said I might have brain damage, might not be myself. They suggested she consider letting me go." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "She didn't. She gave me time, and I woke up. I'm here. I'm whole." Sarah looked at him with desperate hope, wanting to believe that Max's story could have the same ending. But Dr. Cooper gently interrupted. "Jake, you were in a coma for 3 weeks. We're talking about 72 hours for Max. After that, if there's no improvement, the likelihood of meaningful recovery drops to nearly zero. And unlike with humans, we can't communicate with Max about rehabilitation, can't explain why he's in pain or what we're trying to do. If he wakes up confused and suffering, he'll just be terrified." The weight of the decision was crushing. Sarah thought about Max's life, the years of service, the heroism, the suffering under Travis, the incredible will to survive that had brought him this far. Did he fight so hard just to end up trapped in a damaged body, unable to understand why the world had become frightening and incomprehensible? Or had he fought because some instinct told him that life, any life, was worth preserving? Sarah looked at Emma, whose tears were flowing freely now. She thought about the video of Max placing his paw on Jake's knee, the gesture of forgiveness and connection. She thought about Max trying to wag his tail even when dying in the industrial lot. Every sign pointed to a dog who wanted to live, who chose life even when life meant pain. 72 hours, Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. We give him 72 hours to wake up. If there's no sign of consciousness by then, if he shows no response, no recognition, nothing that suggests Max is still in there, then we let him go peacefully. We don't let him wake up to a nightmare, but we give him time. We give him the chance that his fighting spirit has earned. Dr. Cooper nodded slowly. 72 hours. I'll make sure he's comfortable, that all his needs are met. And Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that saving him might not have been enough." The vigil that followed was the hardest thing Sarah had ever endured. Word spread through the community that Max was in a coma, that his survival was uncertain, that the dog who had captured the nation's heart might never wake up. The crowd outside the rescue center swelled again, people coming to hold silent watch, to bear witness to whatever ending this story would have. Inside, Emma refused to leave Max's side. She read to him constantly, Ethan's diary entries that police had released to the family, stories about dogs, anything she thought might reach through the darkness and pull Max back. "Remember, Ethan?" she would whisper. "Remember how much he loved you. Remember Jake. Remember me. Remember Mom. Remember that you're loved. Please remember and come back." Sarah watched the monitors obsessively, hoping for any change in brain activity, any flicker of response. She found herself bargaining with fate, with God, with the universe. "Take my rescue center, take my savings, take anything, but don't take Max. Not like this. Not after everything he survived." The cruelty of it was overwhelming, that Max could endure 2 years of torture, could survive abandonment and surgery and cardiac arrest, only to be stolen away by brain damage. It felt like the universe was proving that sometimes fighting isn't enough, that sometimes courage and will and love still lose to biology and circumstance. And Sarah didn't know if she could accept that truth, didn't know if she could watch Max's life end not with peace but with the terrible acknowledgement that they had all tried their best and it still wasn't enough. The reversal began not with a dramatic awakening, but with a discovery so disturbing that it threatened to overturn everything they thought they understood about Max's condition. It was hour 48 of the 72-hour vigil when Dr. Cooper noticed something unusual in Max's latest blood work. The levels of certain medications in his system were higher than they should have been, particularly the sedatives that were supposed to have been reduced to allow him to wake. Cooper's face went pale as he checked and rechecked the numbers, then immediately ordered a review of Max's medication logs and IV administration records. What he discovered made his hands shake with rage. Someone had been adjusting Max's IV drip, increasing the sedation medications to keep him unconscious. The tampering was subtle, small adjustments that wouldn't immediately trigger alarms, but would be enough to prevent Max from waking while giving the appearance of brain damage. Cooper immediately called for Sarah and Linda Grant, who had been keeping close watch on the case. When they gathered in his office, Cooper's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Max isn't brain damaged. He's being drugged. Someone has been deliberately keeping him sedated to make us think he's in a coma." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical assault. "What? Who would?" But even as she asked, the answer was forming in her mind. Linda was already pulling up the security footage from the ICU. They watched in horrified silence as the recordings showed a figure entering Max's room during the early morning hours when staff was minimal. The person wore scrubs and a surgical cap, moving with confidence that suggested they belonged there. But when they approached Max's IV line, their actions were quick and furtive, adjusting the drip rate before slipping out again. Linda froze the frame and enhanced the image. Even with the surgical cap and mask, there was something familiar about the person's build and movement. She cross-referenced the timestamp with the staff schedule. No one was assigned to that room at 3:17 a.m. Whoever this is, they shouldn't have been there. Dr. Cooper leaned closer to the screen, studying the figure's hands as they manipulated the IV. Those movements. That's someone with medical training. They know exactly what they're doing. This isn't random sabotage. This is someone who understands dosages, who knows how to keep a patient unconscious without killing them. Sarah felt sick as realization crashed over her. Rebecca, Travis's sister. She was a nurse. She knew how to... But Linda was already shaking her head. Rebecca is in custody. She's been in jail since her arrest. This is someone else. Linda made a phone call, her voice sharp with authority, as she demanded the personnel records for everyone who had access to the rescue center over the past 48 hours. The answer came back within minutes, and it changed everything. A volunteer nurse named Margaret Henley had been helping with overnight monitoring. Margaret Henley, the same last name as Travis. The investigation moved swiftly. Linda discovered that Margaret was Travis's mother, Emma and Ethan's grandmother, a woman who had been devastated by her grandson's death and had apparently believed her son's lies about Max being responsible. She had volunteered at the rescue center specifically to get close to Max, to finish what her children had started. When police arrived at Margaret's home with a warrant, they found a journal that detailed her actions and motivations. The entries were chilling in their matter-of-fact cruelty. July 27th, the dog survived surgery. My son failed, my daughter failed, but I won't. They're calling him a hero, but he's a killer. He distracted Travis that night. If Max hadn't been in the truck, Ethan would still be alive. I've increased his sedation. Let them think it's brain damage. Let them euthanize him. Either way, he pays for my grandson. The entries continued, each one documenting her sabotage, her cold calculation. But it was the final entry that revealed the depth of her delusion and the truth she'd been hiding even from herself. July 29th. I watched the accident footage today. The police finally released it to the family. Travis was drunk. He was driving drunk and he hit Max when Max tried to warn him. Ethan begged him to stop. I watched my son kill my grandson while that dog tried to save him. But if I admit Max is innocent, then I have to admit my son is a murderer. I have to admit I raised a monster. It's easier to blame the dog. It's easier to make Max the villain. Because if he's the villain, then Travis is just broken. And broken can be forgiven. Sarah read the journal entry with Emma beside her, both of them trying to process the layers of tragedy and twisted logic. Margaret had known the truth, had seen the dashcam footage that proved Max had tried to save Ethan, but had chosen to maintain the lie because accepting reality meant accepting that her son was responsible for her grandson's death. She had tried to murder Max not because she truly believed he was guilty, but because his innocence was too painful to acknowledge. Emma's voice was small and confused. She knew Max was good. She knew he tried to save Ethan. But she tried to kill him anyway? Sarah pulled her daughter close. Sometimes people can't handle the truth, baby, so they create a different story, one that hurts less. But lies always cause more pain in the end. Margaret was arrested, and Max's sedation was immediately corrected. Dr. Cooper carefully calculated the reversal agents, administering medications to counteract the excessive sedatives in Max's system. If I'm right, if this is all drug-induced, he should start showing signs of consciousness within a few hours, Cooper explained, but his voice carried caution. However, we still don't know if there was any real brain damage from the cardiac arrest during surgery. The poisoning Margaret did might have hidden real problems underneath. The waiting began again, but this time with a different quality of hope, not the desperate bargaining hope of the past 2 days, but something more solid, more grounded in evidence. 6 hours after the sedation was reversed, Max's eyelids fluttered. It was Emma who noticed first. She had been reading to him from Ethan's diary, her voice hoarse from hours of continuous reading, when she saw the small movement. "Mom! Mom! His eyes!" Sarah rushed over, her heart pounding. She watched as Max's eyes moved beneath his closed lids, as his breathing pattern changed from the deep, even rhythm of sedation to something lighter, more natural. "Max," Sarah said softly, leaning close. "Max, if you can hear me, we're here. You're safe. You're loved. Come back to us." The moments that followed were agonizing in their slowness. Max's eyes opened slightly, just slits at first, the pupils responding to light in a way they hadn't for days, then wider, though clearly unfocused and confused. Emma was crying, her hand on Max's paw. "It's me, Max. It's Emma. You know me, right? Please know me." Max's head moved slightly, turning toward the sound of her voice. His eyes, clouded with medication but clearing gradually, focused on Emma's face, and then, with visible effort, Max's tail moved, not the weak thump of a dying dog, but a genuine wag. Once, twice, 3 times. "Doctor." Cooper was running tests immediately, checking Max's responses, his pupil dilation, his motor control. "Can you stand, boy? Can you try?" With assistance, Max managed to get his front legs under him, though his back legs remained weak. It was clear he was disoriented, struggling with the aftermath of both the surgery and days of excessive sedation. But his eyes held recognition. When Jake Morrison entered the room, Max's tail wagged again. When Sarah spoke, Max turned to her. He was weak, confused, struggling, but he was present. Max was still Max. The medical evaluation that followed confirmed what they had desperately hoped. No permanent brain damage. The cardiac arrest during surgery had been brief enough that it hadn't caused lasting neurological injury. Margaret's poisoning had been the cause of his unresponsive state, nothing more. Max would need extensive physical therapy. The surgery had been traumatic and his muscles had atrophied from days of unconsciousness, but his mind was intact. His personality remained. The dog who had been a hero, who had endured torture, who had fought so hard to survive, that dog was still there, still whole in the ways that mattered most. But even as relief flooded through everyone who had been fighting for Max, another revelation was unfolding that would reframe the entire narrative. Linda Grant had been conducting a deeper investigation into the night of Ethan's death, and what she uncovered was both heartbreaking and transformative. The dashcam footage that Margaret had mentioned in her journal, footage that had been sealed as part of the accident investigation, but was now being released as evidence in the criminal case against Travis, revealed not just Travis's drunk driving and Max's attempts to warn him, but something else. Something that changed the understanding of Max's loyalty and suffering. The footage showed the moments after the crash, after Ethan had died. Travis, injured but conscious, had pulled himself from the wreckage, and then, with the camera still recording, he had turned to Max, who was whimpering beside Ethan's body. Travis's words, slurred and anguished, were captured clearly. "This is your fault. You distracted me. You killed him." Max had cowered, clearly confused and frightened. And then Travis had kicked him, hard, sending the injured dog tumbling away from the truck. "Get away from him! You don't deserve to be near him!" The recording showed Max limping back, refusing to leave Ethan despite the abuse. Travis kicked him again. "I said get away!" But what happened next was what made Emma gasp when she watched the footage with her mother, what made Sarah's heart break into pieces. Max had crawled back to Ethan's body one final time. And as he laid there, bloodied and traumatized, he had placed his paw on Ethan's chest, exactly where a canine is trained to check for a heartbeat, for signs of life. Max had been trying to save Ethan even after death, trying to fulfill his duty as a service dog even when there was nothing more to be done. And Travis had witnessed this gesture of devotion and loyalty and had chosen to interpret it as guilt, as some kind of canine acknowledgement of responsibility. The footage continued with Travis dragging Max away from Ethan, stuffing him into a patrol car that had arrived on scene. "He's my dog. He's coming home with me," Travis had said to the officer, who was too busy with the fatality to argue. And that was when it had started, not immediately with poisoning and torture, but with the toxic seed of blame taking root in Travis's mind. Max had tried to save Ethan. Max had mourned Ethan. and Travis had punished him for it. Linda brought the footage to the media, believing that the public needed to see the full truth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Even those who had defended Travis, who had argued for understanding and compassion for his trauma, fell silent in the face of this evidence. Max hadn't just been tortured by a grieving father. He'd been tortured specifically for trying to save the person both he and Travis had loved most. The cruelty of it, the profound injustice, resonated with millions. The video went viral, not as entertainment, but as testimony, evidence of the worst of human nature meeting the best of canine nature. But it was Emma who noticed the detail that everyone else had missed. She watched the footage again and again, and finally she called her mother over. "Mom, look at Max's paw. When he puts it on Ethan's chest, look at what he does after." Sarah watched carefully. After checking for a heartbeat and finding none, Max had turned his head, looked directly at Travis, and then back at Ethan. It was brief, just a moment, but the message was clear to anyone who understood working dog behavior. Max had been trying to tell Travis. He had been saying, in the only way he could, help him, save him, do something. Max had been asking Travis to fulfill the duty that Max couldn't, to save the boy they both loved. "He was asking for help," Emma whispered. "He wasn't giving up on Ethan. He was trying to get Travis to help." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she understood. Max hadn't just been a hero in that moment. He'd been trying to make Travis a hero too, trying to get the boy's father to do what a dog couldn't, and Travis had responded with violence and blame. The tragedy wasn't just that Ethan died. It was that Max had tried to orchestrate a rescue that never came, had believed in Travis's love for his son enough to ask for his help, and had received hatred in return. This revelation reframed everything. Max's loyalty wasn't blind devotion or simple animal conditioning. It was a conscious choice made by an intelligent being who understood loss and love and duty. When Ethan had asked Max to take care of Travis, to love him even when he was broken, Max had been trying to do exactly that from the very first moment. He had been trying to make Travis into the father Ethan deserved, the man who would save his son. And when that failed, when Ethan died anyway, Max had continued trying to connect with Travis to fulfill Ethan's final request. Every instance of abuse that Max endured, every moment of torture, he could have run away, could have attacked Travis, could have defended himself, but he hadn't. Because somewhere in his canine understanding, Max believed he had made a promise to a dying boy, and promises weren't broken just because they brought pain. The nation watched this truth unfold, watched the footage and heard the analysis, and came to understand that they had been witnessing not just a story of survival, but a story of love so profound that it transcended species, that it persisted through torture and abandonment and near death. Max became not just a symbol of animal resilience, but of the kind of love that humans aspired to, unconditional, sacrificial, unwavering even in the face of betrayal. And somewhere in a jail cell, Travis Henley watched the same footage and understood, perhaps for the first time, the depth of what he had destroyed and the magnitude of the forgiveness Max had been offering him all along. The resolution of Max's story unfolded gradually over the months that followed, not with a single moment of triumph, but with the slow, deliberate work of healing that comes after profound trauma. Max's physical recovery was remarkable by any medical standard, though it demanded patience from everyone involved. In those first weeks after waking from the drug-induced coma, Max could barely walk more than a few steps without exhaustion overwhelming him. His body, ravaged by 2 years of torture, starvation, and the massive surgery, needed to relearn basic functions. Dr. Cooper designed a rehabilitation program that started with simple exercises, standing for 30 seconds, taking 5 steps, moving from lying down to sitting, and gradually increased in complexity and duration. Emma became Max's constant companion and unofficial therapy assistant. Every day after school, she would arrive at the rescue center with her backpack full of homework that she'd complete sitting beside Max's recovery kennel. She would help him with his exercises, encouraging him with the kind of gentle persistence that only children seem to possess. "Come on, Max. 3 more steps. You can do it. I know you're tired, but you're strong. You're the strongest dog I know." And Max, who had endured so much at human hands, responded to this child's love with determined effort. When he managed to walk across the room without assistance for the first time, Emma cried tears of joy, and Max, sensing her emotion, licked the tears from her face with the gentleness of a creature who understood that this little girl had fought for him as fiercely as he had fought to live. Sarah watched her daughter bloom during those months of Max's recovery. Emma had always been quiet, careful, marked by the abandonment of her biological mother and the loss that had defined her young life. But Max gave her purpose. She researched canine rehabilitation techniques online, created charts tracking Max's progress, and even started a journal documenting his recovery journey. "Mom," she said one evening as they drove home from the rescue center, "I think I want to be a veterinarian when I grow up. I want to help animals like Dr. Cooper helps them. I want to give them second chances like we gave Max." Sarah's heart swelled with pride and something else, gratitude that from all this darkness, her daughter had found not bitterness, but calling. The legal proceedings against Travis, Rebecca, and Margaret moved forward with the weight of overwhelming evidence and public attention. Travis pleaded guilty to 5 counts of animal cruelty for the deaths of the previous dogs, 1 count of torture for his treatment of Max, and was additionally charged with vehicular manslaughter once the dashcam footage led prosecutors to reopen Ethan's case. His attorney attempted to argue diminished capacity due to PTSD and grief, but the premeditation evident in his injection logs and the systematic nature of his crimes made such a defense untenable. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Morales, who had served in the Navy before attending law school, delivered a sentence that acknowledged both Travis's service and his crimes. "Mr. Henley," Judge Morales said during sentencing, her voice carrying through the packed courtroom, "you served your country with honor. You suffered losses that would break many people. The court acknowledges your PTSD and the devastating grief of losing your son. However, your trauma does not excuse the calculated, prolonged torture of innocent animals who had also served their country with honor. These were not acts of momentary rage or loss of control. These were conscious choices made repeatedly over years. You documented your crimes. You sought out victims deliberately. And when your actions were discovered, your family continued your work. This speaks not to mental illness, but to moral failure." She sentenced Travis to 8 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment, followed by 5 years probation, during which he would be prohibited from owning or having contact with any animals. Rebecca received 5 years for her role in poisoning Max at the hospital, with the judge noting that her actions had nearly succeeded where her brothers had failed. Margaret, Travis's mother, received a lighter sentence of 3 years due to her age and lack of prior criminal history, but Judge Morales made clear that her betrayal of trust as a volunteer was particularly egregious. "You entered a place of healing under false pretenses and attempted murder," the judge said. "That you are a grieving grandmother does not mitigate your crime. It compounds it because you knew the truth and chose cruelty anyway." Throughout the trial, Sarah had kept Max away from the courthouse, not wanting to subject him to the chaos and the proximity to the people who had hurt him. But the prosecution had requested that Max be present for the sentencing, believing that the judge and public needed to see the victim they'd been discussing in abstract terms. Sarah was reluctant, but Dr. Cooper assured her that Max was stable enough for the brief appearance. So on the day of sentencing, 4 months after Max's rescue, he entered a courtroom for the first time in his life. The moment Max appeared, walking slowly but steadily beside Sarah with Emma holding his leash, the courtroom fell absolutely silent. This was not the dying dog from the viral photos. This was not the emaciated creature covered in tumors. Max had gained back 20 pounds of healthy weight. His coat, once patchy and diseased, had grown back thick and glossy. The extensive surgical scar on his abdomen was visible but healing well. He was still thin, still marked by what he'd endured, but he was undeniably alive and recovering. The bailiff had to call for order as people began to cry, to whisper, to simply stare at the evidence of survival walking through their midst. But it was Travis's reaction that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. He had been sitting at the defendant's table, his face carefully neutral as he'd been throughout the trial, accepting his sentence with what appeared to be resigned acceptance. But when Max entered, when Travis saw for the first time the dog he'd tortured, not as a distant news story, but as a living being in the same room, something in him shattered. He stood abruptly, his lawyer grabbing his arm to restrain him, and a sound came from him that was barely human, a wail of anguish so raw that even those who had called for his harshest punishment felt uncomfortable hearing it. "Max!" Travis choked out, his voice breaking. "Oh God, Max, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The bailiff moved to intervene, thinking Travis might be a threat, but Judge Morales held up her hand. She watched as Travis collapsed back into his chair, his whole body shaking with sobs. Max, for his part, had stopped walking when he heard Travis's voice. His ears went back slightly, his body tensed, not with aggression but with the memory of pain. Sarah knelt beside him, ready to lead him away if he showed any distress. But what happened next would become the defining image of the entire case. Max took one step toward Travis, then another. Sarah didn't stop him, sensing that Max needed to do this, needed to face the source of his trauma on his own terms. Emma held the leash loosely, tears streaming down her face as she watched. Max crossed the courtroom slowly, his limp still noticeable, until he was standing directly in front of Travis. The entire courtroom held its breath. Travis, still handcuffed, had slid from his chair onto his knees, his face level with Max's. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "Ethan would be so ashamed of me. You tried to save him and I destroyed you for it. I'm so sorry." Max looked at Travis for a long moment. Everyone watching tried to read something in the dog's expression. Forgiveness, hatred, fear, understanding. But Max's face held only the inscrutable dignity that animals possess, the ability to exist fully in the present moment without the weight of past or future. Then Max did something that made even Judge Morales's eyes glisten with tears. He sat down calmly in front of Travis and raised his right paw, the same gesture he'd made to Jake Morrison, the same gesture he'd made to Ethan's body in the moments after the crash. An offer of connection, a canine's salute, a gesture that could mean many things or nothing at all, but that carried the weight of every moment these two beings had shared. Travis took Max's paw in his cuffed hands as gently as if it were made of glass. He held it for just a moment before the bailiff finally intervened, leading Travis away as he continued to sob. Max watched him go, then turned and walked back to Sarah and Emma, his tail not wagging but not tucked either. He had faced his abuser, had made his own choice about how to respond, and was now ready to move forward. Judge Morales, composing herself, concluded the sentencing with words that would be quoted for years to come. "This court has witnessed something remarkable today. Not forgiveness, because I'm not certain animals forgive in the way humans understand it, but perhaps something better, the choice to not be defined by suffering, to not allow trauma to transform you into a reflection of your abuser. Max has shown us the path forward, not just for himself, but for all of us. In the months that followed, Max's recovery continued its steady progression. By 6 months post-rescue, he could run short distances. By 8 months, he had regained almost all his physical capabilities, though he tired more easily than a dog his age should, and certain movements would always cause him discomfort from the extensive surgical scarring. But it was his emotional recovery that proved most remarkable. Despite everything he had endured, Max showed no signs of aggression or fear-based reactivity. He was cautious around strangers initially, but with gentle introduction, he would warm up to new people. He was especially patient with children, as if he understood their innocence, their capacity for uncomplicated love. It was Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, the toxicology specialist who had helped save Max's life, who first suggested that Max might make an excellent therapy dog. He's calm, gentle, and he has an incredible story. Veterans with PTSD, children who've suffered trauma, they might benefit from spending time with a dog who survived and healed. Sarah was initially hesitant, not wanting to put Max through any additional stress. But when they did a trial session at a local veterans center, Max's natural gift became apparent. A veteran in his 60s, who had been suffering from severe PTSD and had not spoken more than a few words in months, sat with Max for 20 minutes. Finally, placing his hand on Max's head, the man whispered, "Did someone hurt you too?" Max's tail wagged gently. The man continued, "But you're okay now, aren't you? You got through it." Max laid his head on the man's lap. "Maybe I can get through it too." Max was officially certified as a therapy dog 10 months after his rescue, with Emma beaming with pride at the ceremony. He began regular visits to veterans centers, children's hospitals, and trauma recovery programs. There was something about Max's presence, the visible scars, the slight limp, the gentle eyes that had seen darkness and emerged still capable of trust, that reached people in ways no human therapist could. Patients would tell Max things they couldn't tell their doctors. Children would cry into his fur. Veterans would sit in silence beside him, finding peace in the companionship of another warrior who understood what it meant to serve and to suffer. Jake Morrison, who had donated his life savings to Max's surgery and had been present for so many crucial moments of Max's recovery, took on a new mission. He used his platform as the officer Max had saved to establish the K9 Heroes Retirement Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that no retired police or military dog would ever face neglect or abandonment. The fund provided medical care, arranged adoptions with carefully vetted families, and created a rapid response network for reports of K9 abuse. Jake served as director, channeling his guilt into action, transforming his mistake into a protective force for countless other dogs. In his office, he kept 2 photos on his desk, one of Max pulling him from the warehouse fire, and one of Max placing his paw in his hand during that first reunion at the rescue center. "These remind me," he told visitors, "that we're saved to save others." Sarah's second chance animal rescue was transformed by Max's story. The publicity and donations that had poured in during Max's crisis allowed Sarah to expand the facility, hire additional staff, and take on more animals. But she never forgot the lesson Max had taught her, that sometimes the fight to save one life is worth everything you have to give, even when the outcome is uncertain. She established a program called Max's Promise, dedicated to taking on the most difficult cases, the animals other rescues deemed too sick, too damaged, too expensive to save. "Max taught us that hopeless isn't the same as worthless," she would tell her staff. "Every life deserves someone to fight for it." Emma, now 9 years old, had become a fixture at the rescue center, helping with everything from cleaning kennels to assisting with basic medical care under Dr. Cooper's supervision. She had started a YouTube channel documenting Max's therapy work, and her videos, showing Max with veterans, with sick children, with other rescue animals, had garnered millions of views. But more importantly, they had inspired thousands of children to get involved in animal welfare, to see that even young people could make a difference. Emma's journal about Max's recovery had been turned into a children's book, illustrated with her own drawings, with all proceeds going to the Canine Heroes Retirement Fund. The dedication read simply, "For Max, who taught me that love is the longest promise." As December approached, bringing with it the anniversary of Max's rescue, Sarah decided to do something she had been considering for months. She contacted Travis in prison, where he had been undergoing intensive psychiatric treatment and had become a model prisoner, spending his days training service dogs for veterans with PTSD through a prison program. She asked if he would be willing to write a letter, not to Max, who couldn't read it, but to the public, to the people who had followed Max's story. Travis agreed, and the letter he produced was raw, honest, and devastating in its self-awareness. The letter, published with Sarah's permission, read, "My name is Travis Henley, and I am a torturer. I am a man who killed his own son through negligence and cowardice, and then punished an innocent animal for witnessing my crime. I am a veteran who betrayed every value I swore to uphold. I am a father who failed at the only job that mattered. These things are true, and no amount of PTSD or grief erases them. But I am also a man trying to understand how I became a monster so that I can help others avoid my path. Max survived me. Ethan didn't. That's the truth I wake up to every day. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. And I'm not sure I could accept it if offered. But I ask anyone reading this, anyone struggling with trauma or grief or rage, don't let your pain turn you into what you hate. Don't make innocent beings pay for your guilt. Seek help. Talk to someone. Choose healing over destruction, because the alternative is me, a man who destroyed everything he should have protected and who will spend the rest of his life trying to atone for crimes that can never be undone." The letter sparked new conversations about trauma, accountability, and the path from harm to healing. Some felt Travis didn't deserve a platform, that his words were self-serving. Others saw in his confession a necessary acknowledgement, a warning to others who might be walking the same dark path. But perhaps most impactfully, his letter led to increased funding for veterans' mental health services and earlier intervention programs designed to identify and support veterans at risk of harming themselves or others. On December 25th, exactly 1 year after Travis had abandoned Max in the industrial lot, Sarah woke early in her small apartment connected to the rescue center. She could hear Emma already awake in the next room, and when she opened her daughter's door, she found Emma sitting on the floor with Max, who now slept in Emma's room every night. They were looking at the tablet together, watching the sunrise through a live camera feed someone had set up at the exact spot where Max had been found. Emma looked up at her mother with shining eyes. "Mom, look. A year ago, Max was dying right there, and now he's here. He's warm and safe and loved. That's a miracle, isn't it?" Sarah sat down beside them, running her hand through Max's thick, healthy coat. "Yes, baby, that's exactly what it is." Max, comfortable and content, stretched and yawned, then rested his head on Emma's lap. His tail thumped steadily against the floor, not the weak, desperate thump of a dying dog trying to please, but the content rhythm of an animal who knows he is home, who is safe, who is loved. Outside, the December morning was cool and clear, the phoenix sun beginning to paint the sky with gold. Inside, a broken warrior had found peace, a grieving child had found purpose, and a family built not from blood, but from choice and love, and the determination to fight for each other had found its way to wholeness. Max had not just survived. He had taught them all what it meant to truly live, to choose love over bitterness, trust over fear, forgiveness over vengeance, and hope over despair. That was his legacy, his final act of service. And it was more than enough. If you've lived 6 or 7 decades on this earth, you know something about loss. You've buried people you loved. You've watched dreams die. You've felt the weight of regret for things done or left undone. Maybe, like Travis, you carry guilt that keeps you awake at night. Maybe, like Sarah, you've wondered if fighting for what's right is worth the cost when the outcome is uncertain. But here's what Max teaches us in our later years, when we need it most. It's never too late to choose love over bitterness. Max could have died hating humans. God knows he had reason. Instead, he offered his paw to a child who needed him. He chose to trust again, to love again, to serve again. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because he refused to let pain define his future. That's the wisdom we need as we face our own twilight years. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strength to stop carrying weight that's killing us. Love isn't foolish. It's the only thing that survives when everything else fails. So I ask you, what burden are you still carrying that you could set down? Who might need your paw extended in friendship? Share your story in the comments below. Tell us what Max's journey means to you. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.